Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite transatlantic football podcast. My name's Jack Collins, and I'm joined, as ever, by the wonderful Mr. Dean Jones, all the way from San Diego. How you doing, mate?
Hola, how are you, Jack? I was going to say that in Spanish, but I don't know any other Spanish.
I was wondering. You had the moment of panic.
I should have learned some, shouldn't I? I should have done some better research. And learned how to
almost that.
Yeah, very simple, huh? On the spur of the moment, it wasn't really there for me. Yeah, I'm good, mate. Obviously, a few games have been played now in La Liga, so it gives us a bit more to work with as we preview the season as a whole. I think La Liga's flown under the radar a bit in the build-up to it. I have to say, I don't reckon that many people knew it was even starting at the weekend, to be honest. Certainly over here, there wasn't a big promotion for it. I don't know what it was like back in England, but it almost felt like this one crept up. With the others starting next weekend, they got to Friday, and I was like, oh, La Liga's starting as well. Of course it is. But yeah, I imagine as the season goes on, it'll make its impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that basically, the Friday night game wasn't a blitzer kind of didn't help. Obviously, Barcelona played on Saturday, and then Atletico Madrid played on Sunday, and then Real Madrid have played Tuesday, today, as we record. So it's been a bit of a strange one in terms of the way the games are spaced out. I don't like it when La Liga does this. And I know there's reasons, and I know these games are basically spread out because basically none can be played in the afternoon in the middle of August in Spain, and that makes sense, right? But once it's back to 1 on a Friday, 4 on a Saturday, 4 on a Sunday, 1 on a Monday, I will feel more comfortable with the schedule.
Yeah, me too.
Also, the other thing is that TV rights are a weird thing. I know that obviously in the States, ESPN have them and it seems pretty in-house and comfortable. It's a bit different here because there's obviously La Liga TV, which is on Amazon Prime. Premier and ITV had some last year. ITV have lost that rights deal. Premier have kept a couple. So it's all a little bit strange, but also there's no pre-match shows, there's no half times, there's no post-match shows. And so a lot of the stuff that I really used to enjoy, they did a brilliant on La Liga TV. They did a brilliant show that was after the last game on a Sunday every week. And it would basically then do a highlight show. It would be often Terry Gibson on it, and you'd watch through it, and it would basically do a little bit of analysis on each game. I really enjoyed it. It was a really, really good little showcase. We don't have that anymore. It is literally game. At halftime, they show the highlights of the game that's going on and a couple of ad breaks, and then the second half. There's literally nothing apart from comms.
All I hear is gap in the market. That's all I'm hearing, Jack.
Well, someone has tried to fill this gap in the market because the first ever podcast highlights reel deal has been put through together. So the rest is football, which now is going to be Gary Lineker and Alex Aljo and Sid Lowe, I think is the guest on the first one. I don't know if Sid's going to be on it regularly. I hope he is because he's excellent. But they've got basically a YouTube show, which is a podcast with the highlights included, the first ever deal of its type. So
wow,
that's interesting.
I knew the podcast had been launched. I didn't realise that part of it, to be honest. I'd just seen the Gary Lineker advert, so that is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, something new, but obviously Gohan have a lot of money, so they can do things like this. One day, Dean, we'll get the rights to something. Give me the Portuguese league rights. We'll do an English commentary on all of the things happening in the Premier League.
We've got a long time, mate. I reckon we got another 40 years to live. Eventually, we'll get there.
Yeah, we'll get there at some point.
40 years to live. Off we go.
Yes, that'll be hopefully a few more. I'm not going to lie, but we'll see how we go. Once I got past 27, the whole world opened up at that point. Look, we're going to have 3 different parts of this show today. The first part, Dean and I are going to talk about Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, title race and what that looks like. In part 2, I'm going to be joined by Ruairidh Barlow, who is the editor of Football España. I'm going to talk a bit about the European race, the promoted sides, anyone that might be able to slip down, and some of the bigger names who've been middle of the pack for a little while as well. And then in part 3, Dean and I are going to talk about this deal, shall we say, or at least the plan to show or to host a La Liga game in Miami at the start of December. So that's all to come. But I think we should probably start at the top of the table. And I think the only place we can really start, Dean, is with the champions, Barcelona. Now, it was an incredible year for Barcelona under Hansi Flick last year. Obviously, they won the double from a domestic perspective. They got to Champions League semi-final. I think that there is a little bit of kind of frustration that they didn't get to that final because it would have been a very interesting one from a neutral perspective. But I also think that they would have given PSG a better game than Inter ended up doing. It's been a relatively quiet summer. Now, part of this is obviously that Barcelona have a big kind of financial burden lying on their backs. But the big signing was Joan Garcia, who obviously has come in from Espanyol, local rivals. And that was 25 million euros. For my money, the best goalkeeper in La Liga last season. So I think that's a really, really good bit of business. The other deals they've done are Marcus Rashford, who's come in on loan from Manchester United to cover that left wing and that centre forward position. And then Ruairidh Barlow from Copenhagen, who is someone who's been on the radar for a long time, but I don't think anyone was expecting him to make a 2.5 million euro move from Copenhagen to Barcelona this summer. But Deco really pushed this one. It was a personal kind of errand. So what I think is interesting. He's been currently not registered, but that is not necessarily out of the blue. He can be registered as a youth player for Barcelona. So that's something to keep an eye on. I've seen a few outgoings as well. Ansu Fati went on loan to Monaco, where hopefully he can revive his career. Pau Victor went to Braga for 12 million euros or so. Pablo Torre, the centre midfielder, went to Mallorca for 5 million euros. Alex Valle, who was out on loan last year at Como, made that permanent for 6 million euros. And then they lose Inigo Martinez on a free transfer to Al Nassr. Now, I don't know if you've heard about this, Dean, but there was a really strange contract clause in Inigo Martinez's contract. Now, he was earning around 14 million euros, I think, a year at Barcelona from wages. Obviously, he came in as a free agent. There was apparently a contract clause that meant that if a team from abroad came in and he was interested, he could leave for free. I've never, ever, ever heard of a deal like that before.
No, it's definitely unique. Yeah, very strange, but maybe more players are going to start looking into ones like that. In Spain, I guess they do have more clauses and stuff than they were used to in the Premier League, so maybe we shouldn't be totally surprised, but yeah, pretty bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, a strange one in some ways. I mean, look, that squad is pretty similar to what it was last year. And I suppose the big question, and my first kind of thing I was going to ask was, can they be even better than last year with a young core that's now a year more experienced, right? Like, Lamine Yamal has taken the number 10 shirt. He is playing with a confidence that is ludicrous for someone so young, but he is backing it up on the pitch. I don't think we can take loads from Barcelona's win 3-0 away at Mallorca on the opening day because they played against 9 men for 60 minutes of the game. But when you look at what this squad is, I think Inigo is a big miss in the centre of the defence because he was their only left-footed centre-back. And I think that in terms of what he was doing in coaching Pau Kubasi into being this player who is going to be potentially the best centre-back in the world in about 3 years' time, that's a big one. Ronald Araujo is in there, and obviously Christensen's there. Koundé can play as centre-back as well at a push, but he's probably still Barcelona's best right-back and arguably maybe the best right-back in La Liga at the moment. So they obviously need him. But it does feel like the key elements of this squad have been kept together. They've augmented in a couple of interesting positions. And I think that right now they go into the season as pretty hot favourites.
Yeah, I definitely think they're favourites. I do think you can read something into the Mallorca win in the sense that it's still Lamine that forces that first red card. And it's because he's got a fear factor about him. He's weaving in and out of defenders straight away. The way he's on the front foot. That particular run, he's just so dangerous, and he's just got that confidence at the moment that he's just inevitable. I mean, and he obviously cuts inside and steers one into the top corner to get his goal right at the end of the match as well. He is the X factor, and he is setting the bar for what you got to be the star boy of La Liga this season. They're going to have to make rotations because the Champions League is probably going to take on more authority for them this season in the sense of there's going to be more expectation around that tournament. Last season was a bit of a gimme, and perhaps it's why they had some success in the tournament was because people weren't expecting them to have such a good year last year, and they progressed quite well. But this time there will be more thought as to Barca having a go at least at trying to win the Champions League, I think. But from their first performance, I'm just even the way they walked out, to be honest, I'm this is a team that is just exerting their authority now on the league. And they've got that youth, but they've also now got the experience of winning. And that gives them the edge on the other teams as we now get to this new season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Joan Garcia coming in there is an upgrade on Wojciech Szczesny. Szczesny did a great job last year in a moment of need, and he deserves major credit for that. But I think that Joan Garcia, they have potentially one of the best shot stoppers in world football, who's been kind of sliding under the radar for some time. I don't think that's going to go on for much longer. In Rashford, they have someone that can play in multiple positions and is able to kind of fill that gap that Ansu Fati perhaps leaves behind. He was used more than I think people expected towards the back end of last season. We don't really know what Ruairidh Barlow is going to bring. And I wonder if they do need just one more centre-back to kind of string this out a little bit. But I suppose the big question comes in terms of Hansi Flick. Now, what he's done and being able to kind of ice this dressing room and protect them and bring them into a really interesting place, while everything else seems to be on fire outside with loans and debenture schemes and the Camp Nou being out of action for the majority of last season, right? Like not being able to play at home and having to play in the Olympic Stadium instead. They're going to be back at home.
It looks good, mate.
4 weeks.
That place looks good, right?
It looks incredible. Like, how much of that is a bonus? But also, in terms of Hansi Flick's tactics, I think is the other thing. Last year, it was so fun to watch all of the time, but they were incredibly chaotic. It was very much, we'll score more than you, kind of Kevin Keegan in the 90s at Newcastle United with far more talent, we should probably add. But like, it did feel like it doesn't matter how many you score, we'll score more.
I think we'll still see that.
Thrills don't always equal trophies. Do you think that there will be an element of just reining it in a tad?
No, I don't think there should be. I really don't think there should be. I mean, obviously, like, there's going to be a level of discipline here, like, but that's mainly for your defensive 5 players. The rest of them have to be allowed to play off the cuff, have to be allowed to go and play at will. And that includes Rashford, who needs a new lease of life. And the way you're going to get him doing that is to let him get at players, to let him get into spaces at the back post. Like, even the way that Barca scored the first goal, like, Mallorca were trying to camp on the edge of their box. They're trying to crowd him out. And in one moment, Lamine sees a cross is on, dinks it over to the far post. Rafinha charges in, perfect timing, goal. Like 7 minutes in, you got your first goal of the season. It's the breakthrough you needed to go on and control the rest of the game and start enjoying the season. So, yes, to some degree, we'll have to see them control games in a disciplined manner, but there's no way that you can ask that team to become more disciplined in attack because you'll lose too much.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think it's just about finding potentially more of a balance. Obviously, the high line worked for a lot of it, but it also meant we saw, those nutty games against Benfica, for example, the wild game against Inter that saw them ended up knocked out of the Champions League. I do wonder if there is just a little bit of reining it in from a defensive perspective, just to give them a little bit more security, to allow that and allow those players to get forward. My other question mark about Barcelona, and honestly there aren't many because they're so good, is I do wonder if there's still quite a big hole at left back if Alejandro Balde gets injured. Now, Gerard Martin, who filled in there last season and put in some really incredible crosses, obviously, in the back end of the Champions League, but does look suspect defensively. And I do wonder if they had Ali Balde available, if they would have actually beaten Inter in that game, considering how many of the goals came down that flank. Now, we saw Jofre Torrents make his debut at the weekend against Mallorca because Gerard Martin is currently actually not registered. I don't necessarily think that's going to be something we see throughout the season, but the 8th La Masia player to get their debut under Hansi Flick, which is pretty nuts as a statistic. Again, looks better going forward perhaps than defensively. I do worry that if something happens to Alex Balde, and I really hope it doesn't, because he's such a brilliant player to watch and such a wonderful left back to have kind of coming up in the mould of some of the brilliant fullbacks that we've seen at Barca in the past. But I do worry there's a bit of a squad gap in terms of depth behind him, whereas it doesn't feel like there's that everywhere else across the pitch.
It's definitely not there across the rest of the pitch. I mean, even when you look at the other subs that came on at the weekend, Dani Olmo, Gabi, Rashford and Jules Koundé, like, that is unbelievable depth to be bringing on the first day of the season. And so, yeah, potentially that is a flaw, but ultimately this squad has real numbers to it across the rest of the park that if the worst doesn't happen with Balde, then they're in really good shape.
Do you think they win it all? Do you think they can win it all?
What, as in every trophy or just this league?
No, I think that they go in as pretty much red hot favourites to go and win La Liga. Now, we'll talk about...
I don't know if they can do Champions League at the same time.
Okay,
I think that's probably my. It's a lot to ask, and we've seen this so many times. Obviously, picking a Champions League winner is almost impossible. We know that,
especially at this point.
And at this point, definitely impossible. But yeah, the balancing act is so tough, and even just living up to what they did in La Liga last season is going to be difficult. But tempering the expectations to go and win the Champions League is probably their biggest threat, actually, of winning the league again. And I always think you need to make sure you've got that domestic dominance before you worry about the Champions League. Maybe with Barcelona, that's slightly different because of the significance the trophy holds and the competitiveness there is with Madrid as well on that level. But for me, the bread and butter has to be win La Liga again and start to assert an era of dominance when Madrid have put so much money into making it be them that holds that mantle.
Yeah, I mean, look, retaining La Liga is so difficult, right? Like, and that partly is because there's such a kind of duopoly in some ways with Atleti kind of chipping in here and there. But in the last 35 years, only Barcelona have retained it more than once. And in the last 10 years, only Ernesto Valverde's Barcelona went back to back. Apart from that, it was Barcelona in 2015-16, Real Madrid 2016-17, Barcelona under Valverde, Real Madrid, Atleti, Real, Barcelona. Like, this is a thing that the league title tends to change hands in recent years. So I do think it's be very, very interesting to see if they can go on and kind of consolidate in that regard. Let's go over to Real Madrid. They've had a big old summer. So Dean Huyson comes in from Bournemouth, 62.5 million euros. Alvaro Carreras comes in, left back from Benfica, 50 million euros. Franco Mastantuono comes in, right winger from River, 45 million euros. And Trent Alexander-Arnold comes in from Liverpool. It was a 10 million euro fee in the end because they paid extra to have him there for the Club World Cup. And they've let Luka Modric leave to go to Milan. Lucas Vazquez has retired or doesn't have a new club at the very least. Jesus Vallejo left for Albacete on a free. The only sale they've made, Alvaro Rodriguez, the young centre forward who's gone to Elche for 2 million euros. So they've spent about 170 odd million euros and brought in 2 million euros, which shows you the kind of ability that Real Madrid have to go and spend. But the big question mark is obviously Xabi Alonso. It takes over from Carlo Ancelotti. And the question is, what the hell does this Madrid look like under Xabi Alonso? Like system, shape, attitude, how do they adapt to non-Carlo life? Because it's too simplistic to say that it's gone from sort of Vibes FC to a Xabi Alonso system that is going to demand more of them as a system, because Carlo Ancelotti is the most successful manager in history, right? Like, as in, there is absolutely no disrespect coming here from it. But also there was a sense that when they were at their free-flowing, expansive best and he trusted them and those players knew exactly how to win games, Madrid were absolutely glorious to watch. By the end of last season, they felt clunky. They felt all over the place. There wasn't any sort of real shape or determinism to what they look like. That is going to have to change under Xabi Alonso.
They're going to be extremely controlling, ball dominant. But the big test for them will be almost interchanging positions to come up with movements that are unpredictable. And I think that that's going to be a challenge that Alonso has to rise to quickly, because you don't want this team to become predictable. Yeah, I mean, even just going by the first game that's just been played against Osasuna, you just see Osasuna have just sat there and been like, go on then, break us down. And it just becomes overcrowded. And at some stages, particularly in the first half, Madrid players are almost on each other's footsteps. You know, they're following each other around. They're like, "Oh, you're in my space." Like that, it becomes so crowded. And like I talked about with Barcelona scoring their opening goal against Mallorca, where they were trying to crowd them out, but Lamine sees one moment, plays the ball over the top, and Rafinha's in. Madrid didn't really have the dynamism of just trying those spur of the moment things. Vinny would try and dribble at someone which was predictable, or Mbappe would try. It was all just a bit like the kind of stuff you would guess they try to do. And I don't think that's going to work. One of the things that makes it even more complicated is having Trent and Huyson in the defence now, because both of those guys like to step into midfield and play out of there. But here you've already got Güler or Tchouameni or even Valverde like sat there. So they need to move out the way so that those guys can step forward and start to play in there. Like Huyson, I love the way he plays. And as soon as this game started, you saw how easy he is on the ball and how he's going to be confident enough to do that. But it's only going to work if they kind of open up the spaces for him and start making the runs that are more difficult to predict from the other side of it. Getting it's a 1-0 win with a penalty. I mean, everyone's going to throw that at them straight away. Oh, what a surprise! Madrid scored 1 goal and it was a penalty. Like, there you go. Who would have thought it? But obviously, they had to work for that moment. And Mbappe's come up with a quick movement that wins the pen. So he's kind of done his job for the night. But, this is going to be a learning process. Barcelona have kind of been through their learning process and are now like putting the final touches to that, if you like. And Madrid are kind of a step behind because they've now got the new manager trying to teach them their shapes and movements.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's going to be really interesting seeing what this midfield looks like, and especially under Xabi Alonso, who was obviously such a phenomenal midfielder himself with such a beautiful range of passing. Like, I do wonder if it'll take them some time to get hot, and if they can afford that with Barcelona looking as they do. But I don't mind Trent and Heysem moving into midfield because without Kroos, without Modric now, who is going to pull those strings? Now, Arda Güler is playing a different role to what he was asked to last time as a right winger. He's going to play centrally. And I think that Xabi Alonso wants him to take on that responsibility of progressing the ball in those areas. We're not seeing the kind of there was a couple of passes opened up tonight and it was like, whoa, the switch is on here for Trent, and he wasn't quite at the right place to play that ball over to Vinicius Jr. I thought that there were real positives though. I thought the Madrid's press looked excellent for the most part. Now, obviously, it's going to take some time to learn that, but the triggers were there. I thought that actually you're seeing the front four all pushing into the right areas, and they really did suffocate Osasuna in the first half. Now, what that meant was that Osasuna dropped deeper and deeper and deeper, and it felt really difficult for Madrid to break them down. And I don't think it's a surprise that we can look at it afterwards and be like, oh, where did the penalty come from? Well, it came from a moment in transition, right? Yeah. It came from a moment where Mbappe broke away with the ball and then got to a defender, spun him. And I think the defender's a little bit unlucky in terms of the way that it all falls, but it's a silly challenge and therefore play stupid games, win stupid prizes. It is a penalty and Mbappe converts it. And from that moment, the game is very different. Osasuna cannot play in the same way again. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how this develops. And, obviously we talk about Kylian Mbappe and Vinicius Jr. How do they play together in what is quite a demanding Alonso system, we're going to assume. But I think Brahim Diaz out on the right there is going to be interesting. I think Mastantuono is going to have that shirt at some point and it'll be his to lose. There's a lot of confidence around him and his camp in that he can come in here and be a superstar in the way that Lamine Yamal has become very quickly. And there's a lot of chat out of his camp that he thinks he can rival him for the best teenager in La Liga. That's going to take a lot. But you know what? There's a bit of self-confidence there and I don't mind that at all. I do wonder if there's a little bit of a lack of leadership. Like, who's taking the leadership roles? Like, Valverde is obviously absolutely sensational and we love him almost unconditionally on this podcast. But does Trent keep his place when Carvajal returns properly? Because he's the club captain, he's the leader. You're looking for players to kind of step up and be that guy. That's going to be interesting. But I do think most of this revolves around what we're going to see and how Xabi Alonso adapts his system over the course of this first season.
I think Trent will have a difficult beginning, and I think we saw the start of it already. There's been a fair amount of criticism of his performance in the terms that does he even fit what they're trying to do at Real Madrid or how their fullbacks tend to play at Real Madrid. He's different stylistically to what you would expect him to have, and he gets dragged and people start with their memes and stuff, and the people, obviously largely Liverpool fans who don't want him to succeed, are starting to have little digs at him already after one match day. But
I hate this because you'd be absolutely livid if I'm sure that the same fans would be livid if someone was criticizing Florian Wirtz after this.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. But this is how football works. I mean, the good news for Madrid is that they've seen off Osasuna in the first game, so they've got the narrow win. I guess in kind of like Arsenal have got a narrow win on the first
right?
game.
Done. You win the first game. I said the same about Arsenal.
And now they've got Oviedo and Mallorca. Oviedo have just lost 2-0 on the opening day. Mallorca have lost 3-0 to Barcelona. So you've got an opportunity on those two games. Right, okay, let's go again. Let's see what our learnings were from the first one. Let's come through these two and start to exert some authority before you get to Real Sociedad in the fourth game, which is going to be a bit more of a challenge, So I find that very interesting in terms of how they start to build that out. But yeah, I do think Trent is going to have a bit of a battle on his hands first and foremost to win people over. Obviously, his big mate Jude Bellingham is set up in the stands at the moment, just waving to the crowd rather than being able to play, which isn't ideal. But once he gets back, maybe Trent will feel more settled.
Yeah, I mean, look, Camavinga and Jude at the moment out, and Real Madrid really need to keep more players fit this season. It's going to be a massive part of it. I do think they've sorted out the depth at centre back with Heisen coming in. There looks like 4 very solid options in there now. You know, I'm always a little bit wary of Militao and Alaba having come back off serious injuries that ruled them out for a lot of last season. But I do think that the options feel much stronger than they were last season. Kind of bringing in Heisen as a first choice and losing your fourth choice in Jesus Vallejo feels like they've got to the right kind of place. So that's going to be a good sign. The only last question I have on Madrid, and it is one for you because it's a transfer question in some ways. There's a little bit of chat about them potentially bringing one more in. Now, it's been played down by the kind of characters at the club, but I thought it was intriguing that Mastantuono took the number 30 shirt. Now, squad numbers in La Liga are a little bit weird. First teamers have to be registered 1 to 26, which is why you can't really retire shirts. So this is a thing in La Liga. And Mastantuono has taken the 30 shirt, which has left the 25 vacant, despite the fact he's kind of playing within the first team. I do wonder if that is a sign that they might be looking for one more signing to come in.
I just wonder what they're doing with their number 11, though. Rodrigo's sat there. Like, what's going on? He didn't come on against Osasuna. There hasn't really been much chat about him actually making a transfer, yet there's not really any sign that he's going to get opportunities. Yet he is one of the best players in the world on his day in his position. There's got to be a decision here in the coming days as to what they're going to do with Rodrigo, because this is a complete waste of talent and he can't allow this moment to pass. So if they're going to be bringing in someone, then Rodrigo's got to go. Arsenal have obviously threatened to go and try to sign him if they see that the door is ajar. He appreciates the interest, but hasn't pushed for the transfer.
Liverpool they should really do that, although Arsenal did also give Leandro Trossard a new contract today, which I think is wild.
Yeah, so, you know, you see the Trossard thing and you're like, what, does that rule it out? And I mean, I wrote an article today on Flash Score saying that where do Arsenal end now? Like, Eze, Rodrigo, neither. Do they just end up signing like a defensive cover player because they're going to lose Zinchenko and Kivior? Is that where this now ends? Like, are they going to put the cherry on the cake, or are they just going to do something that's sensible and not push the boat out? But Rodrigo's situation really, really intrigues me, because I don't believe that this is okay, that he could just be left to sit there. And I don't think he can allow that to happen.
Yeah, hashtag free Rodrigo. Let's go to the other side of Madrid and Atleti. Now, another huge summer for Atleti. So they bring in Alex Baena from Villarreal, left winger, sort of centre midfielder, centre attacking midfielder, the most creative player outside of the big two last season, 42 million euros. Potentially the best player, I think, that Atleti could have brought in from La Liga this summer. David Hansko comes in from Feyenoord, friend of the pod, 26 million euros. Jordi Cardoso comes in from Betis, 24 million euros. Jack Raspadori comes in from Napoli, I think as the kind of Julian Alvarez shadow now that Correa has departed, for 22 million euros. Thiago Almada comes in from Botafogo via Lyon, centre attacking midfielder or left winger at times as well, but for 21 million euros. Ruggeri comes in from Atalanta, the left back, for 17 million euros. Marc Pubil comes in from Almeria, right back, 16 million euros. And then they make permanent the loans of Juan Musso from Atalanta for 3 million, the goalkeeper, and Clement Longley joins on a free after being on loan last season from Barcelona. Out the door goes Samuel Lino to Flamengo for 22 million euros. Artur Vermeuren's midfielder loan to Leipzig is made permanent for 20 million euros. Rodrigo Riquelme goes to Betis for 8 million euros. I'm really excited about that, just kind of full stop, but I'll talk about that later. Angel Correa leaves for Tigres for 8 million euros. Reinildo leaves for Sunderland for free. Axel Witsel leaves for Girona for free. Rodrigo de Paul leaves on loan into Miami. Thomas Lemar leaves on loan to Girona, and Cesar Azpilicueta is released. So that's a big spend, Dean. And I think the question over Atleti, because I really like this squad, and I think that in terms of depth and quality across the board, they have maybe the best depth across anybody. I think it's a really, really good squad at this point. But they've spent 175 million euros this summer, 107 million net, on top of spending 188 million euros last summer, 78 million net. So they nearly they're nearly 200 million in the red over 2 seasons. For posterity, right? And obviously there's context, but in those 2 seasons, Barcelona have spent 28 million euros, 5 million euro net, and 60 million euros, but bringing in a 5 million euro profit. So they're net zero. Real Madrid have spent 168 million euros, 166 million net, and 49 million euros, 33 million net. So they've spent over 200 million euros. But Atleti are spending at pretty much the same rate as Real Madrid. Is that sustainable given the drastically different kind of commercial impact that the two sides have? And is this what Atleti needed to actually be like, no, we're going right up into that top three now? Because there was a point last year where I thought they were really in with the title challenges. They had an absolutely dreadful January and February. Obviously, the exit to Real Madrid in the Champions League really knocked them off stride. The exit to Barcelona in the Copa del Rey knocked them off stride. They had a couple of bad games in the league, and suddenly they were just too far off the pace.
It's a little bit more Premier League approach, isn't it? You know, you see teams in England go and spend a lot of money in hope of throwing themselves into the conversation more firmly. And in Spain, you tend to be a little bit more cagey. We obviously don't generally see the same sorts of fees for players unless it's an absolute worldie. But Atletico have to close the gap and they have to make the most of an opportunity, and they'll see how close they generally are to Barca and Real Madrid, and they can definitely topple them. You know, if they can come up with the right mixture. They've got the boss that knows all about this league better than any of the others. And they've got now some star quality that looks like it might have a bit of flair about it. Now, obviously, like Simeone is known to be more gritty than he is to be a man who loves a bit of flair in his team. But it's unavoidable that you look at the signings, you look at the potential for this team to get at people and be like, he can't just battle his way to a title here. Like, he's got to let them off the leash and let them enjoy themselves. And so I'm hoping we see a bit more flexibility in that sense. They've got a creative midfield, a lethal attack, and they can still keep that defensive solidity that can win them a title. Like, I think they've certainly got the capabilities to at least mount a challenge here. Can they keep it going right to the end? Don't know. And how equally at the same time, they're obviously pretty good at Champions League football, let's face it. What's that balance looking like for next season at a time when obviously Barca and Real Madrid are going to have pressure to go on and win that tournament?
Pound for pound, this like first team looks so strong. Like Oblak in goal, obviously one of the best goalkeepers in the world for the last, decade at this point. Lenormand, I know, hasn't completely won over Atleti fans, but I really, really like him. And next to Hansko, I think that's a really, really good defensive partnership with Ruggeri, who I think is a brilliant signing on the left. And then probably Marcos Llorente, but Pubil is a really good addition to challenge in that spot right back. I think the midfield partnership will end up being Pablo Barrios and Johnny Cardoso as kind of first choice. And then in front of that, this kind of array of riches that they have. If they want to go two up top, Alvarez and Sorloth, we saw that work last year. Griezmann's still part of that. Raspadori comes in as that shadow, as I said, to Alvarez. Then you've got Giuliano Simeone, who had a real breakout season, I think 2 years ago, and really kind of came to the fore last year. Baena, Almada. Like, you're looking at it and thinking, wow, like that's a very, very special group of players. Can you bring it all together now? And I think that the pressure's probably on a little bit in terms of, okay, the manager's been backed. The argument with Atleti for so many years is that, you know, Simeone has been able to make do with what he's been given and create challenges and upset the rhythm of the big two at times. Now he has these attacking riches. What's it going to look like? And this is a squad that is fit to challenge and should be challenging. Is coming third to the other two in the duopoly still acceptable when you've had this kind of outlay?
Yeah, exactly. You've got to force yourself into the conversation at the end of the day, and Atleti are trying to do that, and Simeone's got to accept this now. He obviously likes to play things down as much as he can. I don't believe that he does that in his dressing room, but publicly he likes to kind of temper things. Talking of temper, you know, that's something too that he's going to have to manage across this season. Like, can he find the right leadership balance for another blend of players that, particularly with so many new signings, aren't used to perhaps the way that he gets his hairdryer out at times and the way that he can give you an ear bashing, if you like. They've got to be prepared for that, but obviously, like, one of the longest serving managers in the game. And with that comes
highly paid managers in the game.
With it comes a level of respect that is almost unmatched in world football. There's not many people that are up there with him at this point. And again, that gives them a nice little edge over Barca and Real in the sense that they've got managers who are still adapting, still learning about everything, their new stadiums, their new expectations, their new personnel, the culture of Spanish football. Simeone is not doing any of that right now. All he's doing is trying to adjust to get these players into a team to take that final step again.
Yeah, 100%. It's probably worth pointing out that Atleti lost at the weekend. They lost 2-1 to Espanyol, but it was a bit of a freak result in some ways. It was an amazing result for Los Periquitos, and the stadium was bouncing afterwards, but they should have been more than 1-0 ahead. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time for the signings to gel. I would ask the same question that I asked of Real Madrid. Have they got time to do that with Barcelona looking the way that they are? Have they got that space to actually allow these players to gel? Real Madrid didn't look great tonight, but they got over the line. Atleti didn't. So look, I don't think there's anything hugely to worry about that result. It just felt a bit weird in some ways, the way it kind of panned out. But equally, they're still already 3 points behind, and that's a strange place to be. So
results matter, man.
I think so. We'll obviously give our predictions in terms of how the league table looks in a couple of weeks when we do 5x5. But I wanted to just go a little bit deeper into those three before we start to look at the rest of the league. And that's what we're going to do right now, where I'm going to be joined by Ruairidh Barlow, who's the editor of Football España. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Ranks FC and our big La Liga preview. We are underway. I'm Jack Collins, and in this segment, I'm joined by a very, very special guest, the editor of Football España. It's Ruairidh Barlow. How you doing, Rory?
You're far too kind. Delighted to be on, Jack, and to get into another La Liga season where there will always be drama. If there's one thing you want and it's drama, then come to La Liga.
Yeah, 100%. It feels like it began before the season started. And we've discussed Real Madrid and Barcelona and Atleti already, and the amount of drama that goes on behind the scenes at all three of them seems to be this kind of never-ending caterwaul. But there's loads more as well going on. And I think that sometimes, especially in the kind of English language media outlets, I don't know that there's a domination of the big two across kind of the worldwide landscape. But I think especially, in English language, there's this kind of level of ignorance perhaps or ignoring of the rest of the league. So I wanted to deep dive with you onto a few of the other interesting storylines that are going on. And look, I think we're all pretty comfortable in the idea that the big three remain top three. There's no kind of changing that, especially with the amount that Atleti have spent this summer. But I kind of wanted to pick your brain on what you think about the rest of the European contenders, because that battle for Europe has been really kind of choppy and changey over the last 4 or 5 seasons. We've seen lots of teams sort of rising and falling, from the kind of traditional powerhouses to teams that have punched above their weight. I wonder what you kind of thought as a kind of sort of basis for this season.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, there was a stage where I think Sevilla got in there 2-3 seasons in a row, and we're going to come on to Sevilla, I think, a bit later. But after that, it's been kind of a bit of a free-for-all. And Sevilla, they kind of fell off a bit of a cliff. And then Athletic have had their season last year. Real Sociedad, it felt like they really peaked in terms of their trajectory, getting into the Champions League themselves. And now, after Athletic, it's kind of like who's coming next. I think it'll be tight. I think Villarreal will be in there. Athletic are probably favourites to repeat in 4th place. But yeah, Real Betis, as you'll be pleased to know, Jack, are probably my hot take on who might finish 4th. I think I quite like their summer. I think if you look at the last 6 months of the second half of last season, Betis were the form side amongst those three. And even though Isco is now injured for 3 months again, which I will admit I made these predictions before Isco went down injured. But yeah, I think with Isco at full flight for most of the season, hopefully, fingers crossed, I think Betis are my narrow favourites, I will say. I'll give myself a tunnel to dig myself out of the hole as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And the thing with Betis, and it's part of the reason that I kind of fell in love with them in the first place, is that, it's chaos constantly. And just as when it looks like everything is turning a corner, something kind of crashes in to take it all back down again. But in Manuel Pellegrini, with the engineer at the helm, it's felt a lot more stable, a lot more steady. And, that goes all the way back to winning the Copa del Rey a couple of seasons ago. And look, I think what's been really interesting is this business hasn't stopped. There's been a lot of ins and outs at Betis. And in a summer where it's felt at times like outside of the clubs that have money to spend, and the obvious candidates jump up again and again and again, that it's been a relatively quiet summer across a lot of La Liga. And Betis have sort of kind of, they feel like kind of the wheeler dealers of all of this. Now, obviously, kind of Nathan's loan is made permanent, and that's fair enough. But it feels like Betis have the most kind of reach in terms of where they've gone. And this transfer window looks a little bit like what you used to see from a Porto, basically. 5 or 6 years ago, they've gone to Liga MX to bring in Nelson de Osa. They've gone to Nacional to bring in Gonzalo Petit, who's a complete wild card. Valentin Gomez has come in from Vélez. Firpo's back, which is quite nice. And then there's Rodrigo Riquelme, which at 8 million euros feels like an absolute steal for me. Now, I know that he's the replacement for Jesus Rodriguez, who was incredibly highly regarded, but bringing in sort of 22.5 million euros for Jesus Rodriguez and bringing in Rodrigo Riquelme, who's a couple of seasons older, has a little more experience in the La Liga tank, and then making a sort of 17 odd million profit on it, feels like really good business to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, talking of wheeling and dealing, it's probably the first time Manuel Pellegrini will be compared to Harry Redknapp. But yes, definitely. I think you're spot on there with Rodrigo Riquelme, especially. I admit that Riquelme drove me to frustration at times last year for Atleti, but Pellegrini is the exact manager you want in charge of Riquelme. I mean, Pellegrini, this Riquelme and the previous one, but Pellegrini gets the best out of these types of players, these playmakers, these trickier wingers, these talented players that sometimes lack a bit of consistency or lack the kind of platform to go on and show that talent. And I think Jesus Rodriguez is very good for them last season. He added a kind of different pace to this side. He added kind of a change of gear to them. But having said that, he was still very raw and ultimately ended up getting dropped for your Conference League final, which is kind of fair enough. They've got Ez Abde still, and I think the pressure will be off Rodrigo Riquelme a little bit in the way that it wasn't at Atleti. He'll also get played in his position instead of sometimes being shoehorned in at a wing-back position by Diego Simeone. It's a Simeone classic. But yeah, Riquelme is a good bit of business. I certainly think at that price, you're never going to lose money on him. I really like Firpo. Even though Firpo's not perfect, left back was an absolute sieve. It was a colander for Real Betis last season. Perot and Rodriguez just didn't quite manage to shut that left side down. So Firpo, I think, will give them more stability there. The other one is Alvaro Valles, who's the goalkeeper from Las Palmas. The hipsters may remember Valles a year or two ago for being kind of this absurdly good with his feet, playing out from the back goalkeeper, as well as being very good in sticks. He's been waiting for this transfer for about a year and a half, more or less, since it was agreed.
He was completely out of contract. Wasn't a transfer agreed whilst he was still there, and then he's been kind of allowed to run his contract out? It all seems very strange.
Yes, it was very, very Spanish football. The two fell out, basically. They could have done an agreement for a few million and everyone would have shook hands and been pretty happy with it. But instead, they decided to bench Valles for a year and say, well, if you're not signing a new contract, we're going to punish you for this. So yes, the much-awaited arrival of Alvaro Valles will be good. And Adrian San Miguel, he shouldn't have been playing a Conference League final last year at 38. He wasn't quite cut out for it. So yes, I think that will be a big boost for them as well. And the other thing that I'm really hopeful for is Cucho Hernandez, who showed flashes of being really, really good last season. There was a game against Real Madrid where they beat them, and Cucho Hernandez had Rudiger on skates all game, and it was really something to watch. And if he can get that form out of him more regularly and get a few more goals out of him, then that could take this Betis side to the next level, especially if Anthony comes back.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like the one that's kind of waiting to happen. We'll wait to the end of the window, and undoubtedly we'll have a loan sanctioned. It just feels like the way it's going to work out as per usual. So we'll see. I think if he comes through the door, it really does put Betis in a really interesting place again this season. I mean, who else are you looking at? Obviously, we had Celta last year, and you're a Celta kind of on the whole like wave of friendship. It felt like kind of riding that and getting there. I absolutely loved watching this team last season, and it's been a strange summer in some ways. Obviously, Fede Lopez went off to Wolves. I still feel like that move's come a year early, perhaps, for him, and it's going to be interesting to see how his development goes. But he's got opportunities, and he will get opportunities there. How do you see Celta shaping up? Yeah,
that Fede Lopez deal has basically funded their entire summer business, and Fede Lopez has a lot of promise before Wolves fans get on my back. But he has a lot of promise. He played well towards the end of last season, but he was never a key player for Claudio Giraldez. And so,
a lot of money for 6 months, isn't it?
Exactly. You sell him for 23 million. You bring in Brian Zaragoza, who I know has been inconsistent. He never quite has put it together since he made that move to Bayern. But I mean, for 11, 12 million, I think it was in the end, if they sign him permanently, you're getting a Spain winger. So that's good business for Celta. I can't remember the last time they signed kind of a Spain international kind of coming into their prime or getting better on the up, at least. Ferran Jutgla. Barcelona fans may remember him as well. He kind of came through and had a couple of fun games against, I think it was against Villa. He played quite well in the Champions League as well last season. He was at Club Brugge. He's an interesting signing up front, but more so than anything, what makes the Celta side encouraging and exciting was the continuity. I mean, Elijah Moriba's come back. There are times when Elijah Moriba looks like he could be a top class midfielder. He's still only 22, which is a bit nuts given how long he's been on the scene as well. But yes, Giraldez played a fun, open, attacking brand of football last season. They didn't really back off that style regardless of who they were playing. And at the heart of it was a core of young players that he'd been managing for Celta's B team previously. Hugo Sotelo in midfield, Damian in midfield as well, Hugo Alvarez out wide. These are players that you will probably hear linked with your local Premier League team in the next kind of 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, Jutgla's a really interesting one for me because about a year and a half ago on this podcast, when we did our New Year's bold predictions, I'm pretty sure I said that he was going to be worth 20 million and going to a kind of Champions League club, and no disrespect to Brugge, but a consistent Champions League kind of knockout club, should we say, within the next 12 months. Now, it hasn't quite worked out that way, but I do really like him. I think he's a really interesting profile of forward. And look, there's no one nailing down that number 9 spot for Spain at the moment. Obviously, Samu looks like he's the kind of leading contender to kind of take over from Alvaro Morata. But, you know, a good season here from Ferran Jutgla, and he puts himself in the picture. So I think there's a lot to prove from that perspective. The other one that I'm quite intrigued by, Rory, is Valencia. Because obviously Carlos Corberán came in and I thought he did an absolutely sterling job from January. Obviously, the first couple of weeks were a little bit tough with the batterings that were received on occasion by Barcelona, but he really pulled that group together. And it's been another tough summer in that obviously Gazirovski's gone, Christian Mosquera's gone, and Mamadashvili leaves. And you're like, well, okay, that's the entire heart of the back line. And obviously Peter Lim's ownership is not going to spend any money. So they remain kind of a little bit all over the place. But new contract for Javi Guerra. It looks like Diego Lopez is going to sign a new contract as well. I'm intrigued by Dani Raba. Like, there does feel like this could be a fun season from a Valencia perspective, and that they might not be looking over their shoulder quite so much this year.
Yeah, Corberán did an absurdly good job last season. And again, looking at the 6 months in that second half of the season, since Corberán came in, they are a European side based on the points that they've gathered. Obviously, that doesn't really mean much in terms of a full season and in terms of what they have now. But it's those of you that are familiar with Valencia will know that every summer has kind of sowed the seeds of doom for Valencia. And it's been like, how much are we going to kneecap ourselves, for want of a better word, going forward this season? And this summer, okay, you've lost Mosquera. Okay, you've lost Jarek, Mamardashvili. Those are key players, like you say. But you keep Javi Guerra, who I think is many regard as the star of this side compared to kind of the others. Tarega, who is Mosquera's partner, both at Spain under-21 level and was at Valencia last season. He's maybe less, how do I put this, smooth around the edges. He's a little more rough and ready. He's a little bit older, but he's kind of a bit of a leader of that back line. And you look at the transfer window that they've had so far this season and you say, I can make sense of this. This looks like a little bit of a smart season. So having been involved in this kind of 90 days of stormy weather and kind of being in this desert of just no hope, maybe this is just a clearing in the clouds and that's why we're getting so excited about them. But it's really exciting to see Valencia actually do some things that make sense. Copete, who they brought in at centre-back, is kind of a La Liga standard centre-back. He's pretty solid. Baptiste Santamaria, it seems like a reasonable signing in midfield. Ugrinic, Swiss international. Aguirre Zabala, who's the goalkeeper they brought in from Athletic Club. These are all kind of quite exciting or quite solid additions. And Arnaud Danjuma is kind of the wild card signing. And if he hits, if his engine gets running, then Valencia could be really exciting. But it's been a few years for Danjuma.
Corberan the latest to try and start the Danjuma engine. I saw your post about this. It really did make me laugh. I thought it was pretty much spot on. I'm intrigued by this. It felt like Julian decided it was time for him to be a number one, right? Like he made some very good stops in that first game against Real Sociedad, I thought. And you know, you kind of look at it and think, okay, this was maybe your moment. And it feels like this is the right time for him to step in here. Baptiste Santamaria was someone we were really hot on like 3 or 4 years ago and hasn't quite hit the heights that, you know, perhaps we were expecting him to kind of go through the gears. But I still think that's quite an interesting one. And it feels like there's a little bit more to Valencia now. It feels like they're in a slightly more stable hands, and that's obviously a good thing. I always think that a strong Valencia is a good sign for La Liga. And with Levante back up, we get to see Pepelu against Levante, which is the thing I've been looking forward to for about 4 years since he signed that lifetime contract and left 6 months later.
Yes, no, definitely. That will be an interesting reception for him back at the Ciutat de Valencia. But yeah, I think one of the other things that to highlight about this Valencia, the changes that we can point to, or maybe the things that we're just grabbing onto as a narrative because we have to find something to talk about over the summer. But Ron Gourlay, who's the former kind of Chelsea general manager, has come in. He's doing the same role at Valencia, and he gave a big press conference and sounded like he knew what he was talking about. Basically, he was kind of quite optimistic and said, look, there's a base here. We can start building towards something. We can go in the right direction. Whereas for so long, it's been really hard to believe Valencia when they say they're doing things right or when they say that they're going in the right direction. So yeah, I think there is just an air of kind of optimism. And if they can kind of get 10 to 20 points together relatively quickly, then you'll see this Corberan side, a young Corberan side, playing with a bit of freedom. And so yeah, I think that's the hope for Mestalla. And then at that point, it's not quite sky's the limit. Europa League might be the limit, but yeah, it's a fun prospect to look forward to.
Hometown Carlos Corberan feels like he might have the same kind of effect that Giraldez had on Celta last year, especially, as you say, with a young side. Perhaps it's something they can all rally around. And look, we hope that it's a good year for Valencia. Their opponents of the weekend were Real Sociedad, who I found incredibly hard to call in pre-season, Rory. And it's one of those where it's been a relatively quiet summer. Obviously, Martin Zubimendi finally departed after years of speculation, and Imanol Alguacil left as well, which felt to me almost as big a blow. Now, I'm surprised that Leverkusen didn't look to him. I thought that was the move that they were going. They were like, we'll leave one, former Real Sociedad stalwart and bring in another one instead. But Sergio Francisco takes over the job, and there's not loads to work with in terms of experience. It's a strange one. It does feel like this could be a moment for them to go back into the kind of academy and back into the youngsters that came through. I'm with you in that last year when Mikel Merino left, I thought that was Beñat Turrientes' time, and now he finally might get that opportunity to actually make things happen. But I thought they were okay, and I thought they were in the first half in particular against Valencia, and it's going to take some time for it to all gel. But there's a lot of young talent here, and if it can be pulled together, it's quite an exciting team in some ways.
Yeah, it was quite. I thought it was quite a positive start for Francisco. Again, away from home against a decent Valencia side. There's a lot kind of riding on the season for me with Real Sociedad, which is why it's kind of interesting that they gave it to Sergio Francisco, because if they were to miss out on Europe again, then that kind of really brings them into a different league in one sense. It brings them into a different kind of mind space. Okay, we're not European regulars anymore. We're part of the middle pack again. Whereas if they can qualify for Europe again, then that kind of, it allays all these fears. Alguacil's era is kind of over, but it's not a disaster. So it is interesting. On the one hand, I kind of started off this summer thinking quite positively about him. I thought fresh era, fresh voice after 7 years. Sergio Francisco can come in and kind of give them a bit more of a boost, a bit of a fresh message. I like Gedge as a signing. Gedge is a good player. He's been good in La Liga in the past. They've got, like you say, Turrientes, I think, could come into his own. Gorichategi was one of the big hopes from Segunda last season as to somebody that can kick on. But at the same time, there's been a few red flags. And Take Kubo said on the 21st of July, I think it was, that where are the signings? Was literally his words. Take Kubo's got quite a reputation for being quite straight talking and quite to the point when he gives interviews. And he said, where are the signings? I'm waiting for the signings just as much as you guys are to the press. And Sergio Francisco responded and said, you shouldn't expect too much business from us. We'll bring in a few players, but I'm happy with what we got, so on, that kind of thing. And I get it. You don't want to put pressure on your sporting director. You don't want to be too demanding, but it just reeked of a bit of a lack of ambition. It wasn't the right message to send if you want to hang on to Take Kubo, for example. And yes, that kind of really changed my thinking a little bit about them, and it makes me worry that they don't quite have that. I think they're probably one or two players away from getting back into Europe comfortably, but if they don't go and get them, then they're going to be again struggling for goals as they did last season, and perhaps just being a little bit turgid as they have been for one or two seasons now.
Yeah, I mean, where there's Bryce Mendes, there's hope, right? I think it's probably the way it looks. And obviously Sucic is a really interesting player. We didn't see him at the weekend, but there's a couple of really kind of interesting number 10/wide players. Feels like there's no one in front of them. I know they've been haggling with Hetafe for Uche, and it all feels like a bit all up in the air over Umar Sadiq and what that all looks like. But yeah, like I think their base level's probably fine. They probably have a little bit more to give if they can make the market work for them in the next couple of weeks. I'll just take us down to the bottom of the table quickly, because obviously 3 new sides in La Liga. We mentioned one of them already in Levante, but of the 3 who've come up, where do you see them in terms of competitiveness, and how does it look from where you're standing?
Yeah, it's 3 interesting sides in some senses, because I look at Levante and Elche, and I think the 2 biggest reasons that I think they could stay up are their managers. Juan Calero, he's dragged himself up from kind of the 3rd, 4th tier up through Segunda, got them promoted, done a great job wherever he's been. And I think he is a guarantee of competitiveness on the one hand, but I do think that they're slightly lacking a bit of business. Elche, on the other hand, again, Eder Sarabia, quite a name brand manager in Spain at this point. He was a former Barcelona assistant, has a reputation for playing that kind of free-flowing football, but also quite kind of strong and idiosyncratic on his philosophy, very kind of intense man. So he'll be interesting.
Kike Setien philosophy work for me, I've got to say it.
So yeah, exactly. He's cut from that kind of same cloth in many regards, a bit younger, a bit more energy. So it should be interesting to watch how they get on. But again, their recruitment is a little bit lackluster in my view at the very least. And then there's Real Oviedo, who is the underdog story for everyone. Santi Cazorla, 40 years old, returned to La Liga, made his debut with Oviedo in the top division at the weekend. And yeah, I don't know if I've just been reeled into this story and I just want them to stay up, or if there is actual hope for them. But yeah, I was speaking to Martin Pelaez, who's the president. He's also the president of the Pachuca Group, and he's quite... The way he was speaking, given that they also manage other football clubs and reasonably successfully, it gave me a bit more confidence in how they're going to approach this season, even though they were last up, even though their manager, Veljko Paunovic, is probably the one I have the least faith in to finish the season with them. But I think there's a basis there, there's a thought process, and I think they'll be a little bit more aggressive in the market, even if they did look a little bit outmatched against Villarreal, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, part of that I look at and I'm like, if Rondon scores that penalty early doors, is this a very, very different game? I don't know. Like, I feel like Villarreal would have probably had too much, full stop. But it is intriguing kind of seeing it. And some of these signings are quite fun. Obviously, they made Ilias Caira's deal permanent, which I thought was smart business. Luka Ilic comes in from Red Star, Zvezda. Eric Bailly has signed, which I find intriguing. 31 years old. I kind of thought Eric Bailly was older than that. But the loan of Alex Flores from Villarreal is intriguing. Ovia Jaria is a name I haven't heard in a long, long time. Like it's just one of those where he feels like he's bounced around. He left Reading when it all went kind of all over the place. So that's a huge gamble in terms of bringing him in at that point. But it does feel like they've brought in some experience in Bailly and Moldovan, who's obviously been a number 2 at Atleti before and then dropped down a division last season. It feels like he's probably ready for a moment. I think that it's an interesting kind of development, but it does feel another bit like I'm with you in that I really hope they stay up. But I wonder if we're just working on vibes here and just like an eternal respect for Sid Lowe. Yes,
it's quite possible. And part of my kind of thinking when they might stay up was vibes, essentially, and that they might be riding the crest of a wave. Cazorla, obviously, back in the first division. There is a feel-good factor around this Oviedo team. Should they get pummeled off Real Madrid next weekend after being beaten by Villarreal, that wave might die down a little bit. But it seems like they're going for a bit of experience in the market. Rondon, as you say, they moved for Luka Jovic as well, which would have been a fun signing even if they missed out on him. So it seems like they are going to be kind of pushing a little bit in the market. But one of the things that did benefit them last year under Paunovic and previously too was that they had quite a solid kind of basis back for two good centre-backs, even if Bailly comes in. Colombato in midfield, quite just quasi-Sibo, physical players that can really kind of put up a battle. And I feel like it will be there will be a bit of a medieval feel about this Oviedo side this season to go with the architecture of the town.
Yeah, I mean, we always talk about being competitive and that being a thing, right? Like, and making sure you stay up. You win your duels in the middle of the park, you make yourselves hard to beat, and you have a puncher's chance. No more than that, but you have a puncher's chance. In terms of who might slide down, it does feel like it's probably about time to talk about Sevilla, because, you know what, I was actually pleasantly surprised with how they performed against Athletic, but this is like a ticking time bomb in terms of what's going on financially, the fact that there's about 12 senior players in the setup, that they can't sign anyone. Like, from the glory days, and, you know, as a Betis fan, I do take slight smug satisfaction in watching Sevilla crash a little bit, but, you know, again, you don't want to see any team kind of come into a point where it looks like there is a real danger of them kind of collapsing from a, you know, an internal perspective. Let's talk about new stadiums. I'm watching this being like, you can't play players yet. Like, maybe we should put the stadiums on hold for a little while. But it does kind of feel like they are sliding towards that trapdoor. Obviously, they finished 1 point above the relegation zone last year. That's a slightly false picture in that they couldn't be relegated on the final day, and thus they dropped down a couple of positions. But I think kind of generally when you look at it, it does feel like they are moving in one direction, and that direction is downwards.
Yeah, they brought in Antonio Cordon for Victor Rota this summer just passed. And I mean, I've recently been watching back La Liga's Netflix documentary on Sevilla, and that can only be good news. I mean, with all due respect to Horta, he did not cover himself in glory in that series.
He never really has, I think, in these roles.
Yes, yeah, he does. He seems to keep getting jobs. He's at Valladolid now, but so we'll see how they go. But yeah, with back to Sevilla, I think Almeida seems like he's got a good CV. He has that Argentine ability to rile up players, which is useful, especially if you are going to be in a relegation fight. But the general chaos at the top of the club has had its way with numerous managers at this point, and there's no real sign of that abating. So until that kind of gets sorted, until you can find some stability, it's really hard to see. Again, we talk about Valencia. How do you build something off that? And that's going to be the challenge for Almeida. They do have some quality in Luca Bacchio, who scored a brilliant goal at the weekend. Like you say, there's players there that on their day can perform. Agume was quite good. Idumbo looks an exciting winger,
wasn't he?
Yes, I enjoy watching these players, but there's a self-destruct button at Sevilla that seems to happen all the time. And once they get into the Ramon Sanchez Pizjuan, the pressure's on, the fans are on their back. That's when things usually start to go wrong for the Sevilla side. So yeah, there's very little to give you much hope if you're a Sevilla fan, to be perfectly honest. And you're banking on Almeida turning it around with the same players that have struggled for the last 2 seasons. I mean, even the season before, they were in the drop zone or a relegation battle until about February, March. So yeah, it's hard to give Sevilla fans too much hope this season. And I guess the question is, how long does the power structure at Sevilla last before the tyrants at the top, if you want to call it that, Sevilla fans have called them much worse, end up getting kind of beheaded and there's a revolution. So that went very, very medieval in that case.
As for Spain, not France, Rory, mate. I mean, look, if Sevilla fans want something to cling on to, even if they get relegated this season, they'll probably win the derby twice. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts is probably how I'd put it. Is there anyone else, just before we finish, that you feel might get dragged into that fight at the bottom?
Yeah, there's the one that I'm a little bit worried about, and maybe we're placing too much stock on Paulo Gazzaniga's performance, but Girona, they really need to do some business because Miguel Gutierrez is leaving for Napoli. They've lost a lot of the key players that were at the heart of their kind of wonder season a season ago. Michel last season did well in the sense that he kind of altered his method. He became a relegation side in inverted commas. He played kind of backs to the wall football, Stuani up front. But they still don't have a goal scorer. Abel Ruiz and Miovski have not proven themselves capable of doing that job so far. You're banking on a lot of their kind of gambles from last season coming good. This season, the players that have come in, there's not huge amounts to get excited about. So yeah, Michel is really going to have to kind of reinvent the wheel a little bit. And for all that we talk about the benefits of having this kind of City scouting network, Vito Reis has come in as well from City on loan, but that's not really been working for them lately because they've been taking gambles on these types of players. And I think if I was Michel at least, or if I was Quique Carcel, the sporting director, I would be thinking maybe we should just bring in a 28-year-old who knows La Liga inside out and knows how to get the job done, because there's a certain balance you can have between players that are talented and not yet proven and players that will give you a stability, your Oriol Romeos of the world, your David Lopez's of the world, that will just kind of anchor those things for you and allow those players that platform to build on.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it looked pretty bleak at the end of last season. Obviously, they kind of pulled themselves out with it with a couple of games to go. But the idea that a team that started the season in the Champions League group stage were on the verge of being relegated felt uncomfortable, and it wasn't a great start, as you say. So, yeah, we'll keep an eye on Girona as well. Rory, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the podcast. Where can the listeners find you?
Yeah, you can head to my Twitter, which is Ruairidh Barlow, Rui Barlow, and you can also head to Football España, footballespaña.net, with a hyphen in between it. So yeah, that's where you'll find most of our work, and hopefully some good, exciting stuff coming up for you. And Herrera interviews coming out soon. Got a piece about Atleti self-destructing at the weekend again, which I'm sure you might enjoy, Jack. So maybe I'll send it your way.
Yeah, I would very much enjoy that. It was a little bit wild, wasn't it? Definitely go and check out Football España. It's how I sound so knowledgeable about Spanish football most of the time. So brilliant, Ruairidh Barlow joining us. We're going to take a quick break there, and we'll be back in 1 second. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Ranks FC, and thank you again to the brilliant Ruairidh Barlow for his thoughts and opinions in that middle segment. Jack Collins and Dean Jones back with you. And the last thing I think that's there to discuss, DJ, is the kind of headline news coming out of the La Liga situation and the whole federation right now. And that is that it looks like a game between Villarreal and Barcelona so it's meant to be, I think, on the 21st of December, but it looks like it might be different. They might move it around a little bit. It's potentially going to be played instead of at Ceramica, El Madrigal, Villarreal's home fixture, will be moved to be played in Miami at Hard Rock Stadium. Now, this is something that's been brewing for a little while. Javier Tebas, the president of La Liga, has been kind of trying to move matches abroad for like 6-7 years now. This is not the first time this has come up. I think it was 2018. They tried to move a game between Barcelona and Girona, and it was roundly rejected by the Spanish FA, which at that point was obviously under the control of Luis Rubiales. And basically, what's happened in the years since is that there was a lawsuit, a really complex lawsuit, where Relevant, who are La Liga's official US partner, basically sued the Spanish FA for basically making it monopoly that all games in La Liga had to take place in their home territory. Now, I'm not 100% sure that's a lawsuit that I would stand up for, but it's one that was settled out of court, which means it could be kind of brought up again. They also had conversations and a resolution with the US Federation, who had been a little bit in opposition to it and basically said they're not going to stand up against it again. So Relevant won this lawsuit. But Rubiales was still pretty opposed to this. Now, obviously, he has been removed as the head of the RFEF, which is the Spanish Football Federation, and he has been replaced in that role. And what's really interesting about the fact that this has changed is that the new president of the RFEF is pretty okay with it. Right, like he doesn't seem to have the same kind of issues that Rubiales did. And look, there was a massive kind of power struggle going on between Rubiales and Tebas in terms of what this all looked like. And so there's this really kind of interesting thing going on in terms of this has been floated for a long, long time. And there's a lot of discussions. Now, the Spanish Fans Federation or the Union of Spanish Fans has basically been like, no, this is absolutely ridiculous. We don't want this to happen, which is fair enough. I think what's intriguing is that Real Madrid have now spoken out a bit. They've said that it sets an unacceptable precedent and they will stand against it. Now, Real Madrid don't really get a say. It doesn't really matter what Real Madrid think. And I do find it amusing that Real Madrid are like, what? Moving things out of the way that they've always been, not if it doesn't benefit us, because we know that they've tried to change the game in a multitude of different ways in recent years, and they've been relatively successful in not necessarily forcing them through, but forcing change through basically threatening to withdraw from competitions. Now, it does look like this is going to go through because the Spanish FA have basically given their permission. FIFA don't really have a mandate here. UEFA might, but FIFA don't, because FIFA's job, and there's a really brilliant article on The Athletic about this, is basically to promote the globalization of football, right? So anything that helps on that shouldn't really fall under FIFA's remit. The question marks are, does this benefit Barcelona? Because they basically get to play one fewer away game. Now, I'm interested as to how this shakes out, because actually they've got a pretty good record at the Ceramica. And I wonder if Villarreal are like, they normally beat us here anyway, so they may as well beat us in Miami and we'll get paid an absolute ton for it. And, you know, if we're talking about the fees and the figures that they're gonna rack up from this, I think what's really interesting is the money potentially being thrown around by the Villarreal president, Fernando Roig, who is a pretty good president, I think, generally. You know, when you take them all into account, he's had a very successful time at the helm of the club. He's basically said that if supporters of Villarreal want to go to this game, he will fly them to Miami for free, put them up for free, and give them a ticket to the game for free. That's basically the precedent he suggested to season ticket holders. And if people don't want to go, they get 20% of their season ticket off for one of the 19 games that they would be playing, which is pretty significant, I think, considering how this all is kind of looking right now. So when you're talking about this, there's lots of different things to consider. Are Villarreal fans angry about it? Are they happy about it? Are they kind of okay that they're going to get a fifth of their money back for missing one game, or the opportunity to travel to America for free and watch a game in a different location? Barcelona fans probably weren't that concerned about it anyway, because we know that away travel is far less of a thing in Spain than it is in certain other countries in Europe. I mean, I'm intrigued by your thoughts on this. Obviously, you've moved across to the States. How do you feel about it?
I think they should be more open-minded to it. And I think it's, for La Liga, long-term, a good idea. Like, they have been playing catch-up to the Premier League for years now, despite at times actually having all the global icons. And they shouldn't be in a situation where they live in the Premier League shadow for as much of a season as they actually do. I think this is an opportunity to play catch-up. The Premier League obviously got the jump on everybody when they rebranded in 1992-93. And no one's ever caught up. And I find it weird that it's taken so long for other leagues to start to think about ways that they could become more global in order to capture some of the financial benefits that go hand in hand with having a global league. Being over here, I can tell you that like this sport has definitely got a bigger grip on people than I realised, particularly in youngsters. San Diego is a bit of a hotbed anyway for football because we're right on the Mexican border, and there's
so is Miami because it's a huge Spanish.
Exactly. So it's a similar market, Miami. So you still have the whole Hispanic culture, and obviously Miami's hugely appealing to the Barcelona side of this. Messi's there, Suarez is there, Jordi Alba's there, Sergio Busquets are all there playing for Inter Miami, and that's helpful, right? That plays into it. And you're going to have a stadium which is going to be mainly Barcelona fans. But it doesn't matter. Like Villarreal have a chance here to tap into a historic moment and to break ground on something that I think is going to be extremely important to the long-term survival of some of these clubs. Because, if you consider the fact that West Ham or Bournemouth and how many people would know about their players compared to, say, Villarreal, I don't think your average fan will be able to name you 2 Villarreal players. But I think they could do that across average Premier League teams. And it's because the Premier League is just pushed in front of you. And out here, obviously, there are TV rights for La Liga and ESPN and stuff. Premier League is marketed better to get you on NBC and get you on Peacock, so they're still winning that battle out here. We still get the summer series out here with the Premier League. La Liga needs to do something. And while this obviously will not please people who are long-term historic traditionalists of the game, it's got to happen, quite frankly. I actually think this has got to happen. And for the average fan, like, flip this to me or you, say this was Fulham being told that this was going to happen to us, and you were told, well, your season ticket will be 20% cheaper, or if you want, you can actually go to Miami. We'll pay for it. Like, what is there to really lose there? If you were going to go to Fulham v Man United, I don't care about watching Fulham at home to Man United anymore. Like, it's lost all its appeal because I've seen it so many times, and it doesn't really do much for us. Okay, occasionally we might have a chance of beating them, but it's about more than that sometimes. Also, we've got to consider the fact that America is getting hold of the European market right now. It's only there's no point fighting it, to be honest. You can only fight it so much. It's gonna happen.
This is the point. Like, I am actually fundamentally quite opposed to this, right?
I get it.
But like, I do wonder if I'm just sort of raging against the dying of the light here, like in terms of what I'm seeing and the way of the game. And look, I think it's important to rage against the dying of the light. Like, I think it's important to try and stand up for what I believe the game should be. But ultimately, it feels like we're getting steamrolled left, right, and center in terms of what this is, right? There's going to be a Club World Cup every 2 years in the foreseeable future. Like, can I actually do anything about that? I don't think so. Like, obviously, we saw fan mobilization kind of put the Super League on ice, but I don't think that's dead forever. I think that it will be fought left, right, and center in terms of how it operates. But equally, you look at the way that the new system works in the Champions League, and it's clear that, you know, some of the clubs that were pushing this have got sort of the halfway model, right? They've gained from actually pushing that, because UEFA has gone and been like, well, how are we going to adapt this to actually make those guys get back on side? And so I feel quite bad about this, because it's like, Villarreal fans, I've just quickly had a little look and been like, yeah, the entire Supporters Federation of Villarreal have been like, no chance, this is the worst thing ever. We don't want anything to do with this. And we got a question from one of our patrons that we have on the Ranks FC podcast, one of the people that gives us questions every Monday, a guy called Jonah, who is an American, but he's a Real Madrid fan. And he basically said he had a question for us on Monday, and I said we'd answer it in the main podcast because I thought it was going to be part of the narrative. And he said, what do you think about Barca possibly playing a match in the US? Personally, I hate it. As an American, it's not our place to steal league matches. I already have issues with the Americanization of the sport elsewhere, halftime interviews, locker room cameras, etc. But this feels like a step too far. And he said he was glad that the Real Madrid spoke out against the idea. Look, I've already kind of put it to them that if this was Real Madrid, I think we'd be hearing a very different narrative from them, but it is what it is. Like, fundamentally, I believe that football and football clubs should represent the communities that they come from, right? Like, that is my fundamental belief in how this operates. Is that the truth of the matter right now? No. Like, it's not. We've come away from that, and we see that week in, week out with what's going on in stadiums. Is it good for the sport? I think it's a bad thing, generally. I think that the conversations about atmosphere and, you know, things that we get to watch and love, and so much of the bits of the Club World Cup that were positive were kind of seeing it and saying, wow, okay, that fan base who have traveled in their numbers from elsewhere to be able to make that noise and colour and that show, that was the best part of all of it. And we saw something like the Copa Libertadores final being moved to Spain, which is wild in itself, right? Just as a whole separate point, between River and Boca. And now part of that was obviously that there was so much trouble at the first game that they had to move it somewhere else. But bringing it to Spain and seeing the difference in atmospheres in those two legs of that game, it's like chalk and cheese, right? Like, as in, everything I love about the Libertadores, yeah, okay, it went too far, 100%. Like, no, we're not getting away from that. We're not condoning any of the violence or any of the things that happened around it. But the difference in atmosphere between those two games and everything that we kind of know and love about it is like chalk and cheese, as I say. And that, I think, is something that you can't transplant. You can't plug and play that. And I think that when you're looking at this from that perspective, obviously, this isn't just on La Liga. There's talk at the moment in Serie A that they're potentially going to move the game between Milan and Como to Perth in Australia because they can't play the game in its supposed location anyway because it's the start of the Winter Olympics. And you're looking at it and being like, Perth? Like, what? I don't get it. I don't understand. And so, like, whilst I can completely compute what you're saying about, building it up and helping it, do you think that if this game takes place, Barcelona have a worldwide fan base anyway, right? Full stop. Like, that exists. Do you think that for Villarreal, they're going to gain 200 fans in the US because they play a game there against Barcelona? Because I don't. I don't believe that's the case. I think loads of people will go for Barcelona and they'll watch Barcelona. They'll be cool. They'll be like, oh, that's nice. We've got to see a different team as well. Might learn a little bit about them.
Well, you've heard of them. For starters, you've heard of them. Have my kids heard of Villarreal before? No. But if they were playing in San Diego and they went to the game,
that's on you.
would they have heard of them? Yeah. They're not stealing football here. They're already sharing control of their own major sport in the NFL by bringing that over to Europe. So they're not just stealing our sport.
Right? The NFL started this. And it's like one of those things.
So they're not stealing stuff. Like, they've shared their own sport, and obviously that's also because they want to grow their franchises and make them more money. And we've seen it. NBA games are starting to go to Europe. MLB games are starting to go to Europe. And I know, if they're not important games at this point, they will become that. We will eventually see that. We'll eventually see a Champions League final played in America. We've done that on Ranks probably 4 years ago, talked about that. But the world's just smaller. The world's just become smaller, and football families have become smaller, and clubs are more desperate than ever to give other groups of people the chance to watch these players at the same time as obviously they want to make money and get them to buy all their merchandise and all the tickets. My main fear would be the price of their tickets for this game, because seeing what that they've priced on the Club World Cup, seeing what they price friendlies up at, seeing what they're going to price the World Cup at, I would fear for who's actually going to be at this Barcelona-Villarreal match, because the chances are that it would be $200, $300, $400 starting price. And the people that you want in there because you want to grow this sport in America and because you want it to hit grassroots level and you want to inspire generations, they won't actually be able to go anyway because they won't be able to afford it. And you'll just have the rich of Miami there, which I don't think is going to really help anyone. But if you can change that and you can make sure that Villarreal fans are in the ground who support them through thick and thin, and you have at least a percentage of that stadium that are in there paying no more than $50 a ticket to at least give kids the chance to see these guys, then I would be more open to it. I highly doubt that would be the case because what I've seen in America so far suggests that one, kids' price tickets don't even exist, and two, that they don't really want to make it that accessible to people. They just want to make money out of these events. So that would be my biggest downfall of it. But generally, I think that we've got to be open-minded about it, and I think La Liga have to embrace something, and there is scope here in America to start to catch the Premier League.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I appreciate it. And also I take your point that sometimes it does just feel like I'm shouting into the void when I'm talking about these things. And look, I don't begrudge things going elsewhere. Like you say, and I think there's a slight difference in terms of how things are used in terms of where other sports are and the way they were founded, right? Like it doesn't always kind of add up the same way. Like MLB coming over when there's 150 odd games a year doesn't have the same kind of impact. I think the NFL one is more of a useful example, but equally, how much of it do you see where people are coming into those and just like wearing any shirt, etc. Like, I'm not sure how it helps Villarreal. I think it helps Barcelona. I think that they basically play an extra home game, right? Like, because ultimately the stadium will be mostly full of people who know and want to see Barcelona play. My maybe biggest gripe with it is that I've loved watching Villarreal in recent years. They at the Ceramica at El Madrigal, there's a capacity of 25 odd thousand people. The whole city is basically 50,000 people. They are batting so far above their average in terms of the size of the town, the size of the place. It is a super hyper local club that has been brought to real success by being incredibly well run and well put together. And like part of that is their magic, right? Part of that is the idea of what they represent and being the kind of like smaller guy, the David to the Goliaths in so many ways. And I'm not saying they've gone and won leagues, but obviously that Europa League victory over Manchester United a couple of years ago, like it was chalk and cheese again in terms of what those two sides are. And like that magic of them being this kind of small town club that's representing the community and all of that, that has always been part of their mystique, as far as I'm concerned. And I wonder if that changes if they start to, do things like this.
Only one way to find out, mate. Only one way to find out.
Perhaps. Anyway, I thought it was worth bringing up because it's an interesting topic, and it's gonna dominate conversation for years to come, I'd imagine. So we can rage against it all we like. I don't think we're going to stop it happening at this point. And with that, I think it's probably time for us to call it a day. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you one more time to the brilliant Ruairidh Barlow. Do go and check out Football España. It is a wonderful website full of brilliant news on all things La Liga. Thank you very much to the ever brilliant Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC and our La Liga season preview. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you all very, very shortly. Take it easy, gang. Peace.